Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Jones and Company. This is a special Jones and Company, and it is special because, firstly, this is the first time I've hosted Jones and Company, and secondly, we have a very special guest, the Honorable George Andrew Smith. Mr. Smith has been here on several occasions, but he and I have never done the show together. And it is indeed a privilege for me to have this opportunity to have this conversation with Mr. Smith at this juncture in our historical development. As many of you may know, Mr. Smith was the individual who was responsible for the Independence Secretariat celebrations in 1973. And 50 years later, ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Davis has appointed him the chief envoy for the Independence celebration of our 50th. And it is a very special occasion for me to have Mr. Smith on this program once again to talk not just about the past independence celebration, but where have we come as a people and as a country. I recently wrote a book called The Road to Bahamaland. And one of the reasons for writing that book was because we are experiencing, ladies and gentlemen, a generational divide. Most Bahamians today were born after independence. And many Bahamians today do not know from whence we came. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to do this program with an individual like Mr. Smith, so that we can bring some nostalgia to where we are. Welcome to the program, Mr. Smith.
Thank you so very much, my dear brother. Mr. Enos is very kind in his comments about me, but the real reason why just the two of us are sitting here today is this. My relationship with Mr. Enos has spanned more years than both of us are prepared to admit to, having regard to the fact that we both look so youthful. But he knows he could take advantage of me and call me on short notice, and he is one of the few people to whom I cannot say no to. I can't say no to him. I've been around a little while. I've seen what has happened in the Bahamas since 1973. And I have reason to be proud of so many of our accomplishments. We know of them by reflecting on the establishment of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the College of the Bahamas is now University of Bahamas, the Defense Force, national insurance that underpins the nation's social need when people are having difficult times. And there are so many others. There are many, many companies in this country that have prospered over the last 50 years that was born in 1973. The Sunshine Boys that now has grown into various different empires, economic empires, real estate companies, other businesses, other institutions, fraternal organizations, even some churches which got started in 1973. So I've been around and I am aware of the historical defining significance 50 years represents in a country. It is a time when the people of that country and its institutions, primarily the government, should take a retrospective look at the country from the day of birth that took place at Clifford Park at Fort Charlotte and onward to today and determine what it is about our state emblems and our state institutions that we ought to look at and determine how by critiquing them we could correct them, improve on them, or maybe make major alteration. It also suggests in our 50th year how the business institutions, how the different bodies of faith, Christians or otherwise, ought to look at themselves and see how well they serve the Bahamian people. The various other organizations, the legal fraternity, the professional fraternity. I was hoping today, for instance, if Mr. William Wallace would have been able to be here with us. I wanted to specifically ask him to address the question about how his fraternity, the accounting profession, has served the needs of the Bahamian people and how their conduct has made the Bahamas a better place for Bahamians, because at the end of the day, whatever we have done, be it praiseworthy or whether those things may have been a cause for some embarrassments, some disappointments, if they didn't serve the needs of the Bahamian people and make them a better people in an independent Bahamas than they would have been if we had not attained independence in 1973. So I'm delighted that Mr. Eneas has asked me to be here. I hope that what we discussed today is worthy of your attention and your interest. And I hope that you will look beyond the criticism of some, that people who have been successful by their training, by their intellectual capacity, and their wisdom, but who have attained some age in life. Don't be a party to those who think that they ought to be discarded, because you can only have, if you have intelligence and you have experience, you're then probably endowed with wisdom. And it is the wise people of the Bahamas that who ultimately know what's best to happen here. And that applies to them whether they are young, middle-aged, or aged. So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me, sir.
Mr. Smith, you raised a number of issues in your preamble. One of the things that concerned me, sir, is that we live in a country, Mr. Smith, where there's certain deficiencies in our educational system, like, for example, the Bahamas that you and I came of it. There was really no Bahamian history. We learned about Woodes Rogers and that kind of British history. And what concerns me, Mr. Smith, is that being in a situation where most of the Bahamians living today are born after independence, they don't know the Bahamas that you and I grew up in. And when you compare the Bahamas that you and I grew up in to where we are now, like you said, we've made tremendous achievement. And what is your view on that?
I don't agree that we don't have a Bahamian history.
No, I said we weren't taught Bahamian history.
We weren't taught Bahamian history because the Bahamian history would have, and it was never put into the curricula, and it isn't yet today in the curricula. But if we were to put it in the curricula, we have a history of courage, of determination, of tremendous leadership. We the British government and the British monarch at the time agreed for the freeing of the slaves. But it was only after the slaves decided, those who are enslaved, only after they decided that they will be slaves no longer.
Yeah.
So they fought for it. Pompey and so many others, Pompey of Exuma, those who stood up in Cat Island and Abaco in New Providence. So we won our freedom. But we never, it's somewhere in the archives. We need our bright minds at the University of the Bahamas to go there, get the facts. It's there. I made a speech yesterday before Joan Sawyer's Bahamas Business Outlook. And I chronologized some of the events in our history that points to the courage of our people. The leadership in the incident of 1942, the courage of the women to fight for the right to vote, the leadership in the trade union in the 1958 strike, that those who fought for the getting rid of the company vote, the property vote, that made sure that that only people who were genuine belongers and citizens of, well, who would become citizens of the Bahamas could vote. And reducing the voting age from 21 to 18 to encourage more young people to participate in the decision-making program. All of those acts, men like Lyndon Pendant, Milo Butler, Cecil Wallace, who was at one point chair of the Progressive Liberal Party, other folks, so many other people, Livingston, Coakley, there are many, many people. They all was distinguished by the fact that they were men and women of courage. And they wanted to bring the Bahamas in the mainstream of becoming a progressive and forward-thinking country. And the information is there. And I believe when we get around to writing it and teaching it in school, young Bahamians will realize that those people that they refer to as older people and they who only tell stories, well, these stories we tell is the story of the courage of our ancestors, the courage of our forefathers, courage of men and women, many of whom are still with us. So those who came after 1973 are the beneficiary of a bedrock foundation that was nobly built through the sweat, tears, sacrifice, and courage of people who were prepared to first take on the British garrison, the Canadian garrison, who were here to keep people in tow in what they call the Burma Road riot. There was no riot.
The Worcester Regiment?
The Worcester Regiment, all that. So we have so much to teach in our schools. We've just got to make sure they get put in the curriculum, and we have the talent in the country to do it.
Mr. Smith, you are a unique figure in our history, right? I have a photograph here in this book where you were one of the signatories to our Constitution. And I believe there only were 3 of you living who were the original?
5.
5 living, right?
5.
Name the 5.
Sir Arthur Folkes, who is still very, very alert, and he's 94, I think. Sir Orville Turnquist, who is rather ill, but I think he's 93. The Honorable Loftus Roker, who is still with us, and whose mind is still sharp and as combative as he's always been. Philip Battle of Palmetto Point Eleuthera, who is still with us. He's now an ordained minister of the gospel. He's still here, and I am here. I believe that this 50 years should call to reflect on those 4 men and myself, 5 of us, who are still here, and to remember with great pride the others who have moved on. And each of them played a role at a pivotal moment when they were sent to London to put to the British a decision that was taken by the Bahamian people in a 1972 general election. And the composition of the delegation reflected the composition of the House of Assembly. The PLP got so many members of the delegation to reflect the numbers of seats we won. The F&M got so many to reflect the number of seats they won. But we went as a delegation. And whatever differences we had, we discussed. And the F&M delegation was led by very distinguished Bahamian jurors, the late Sir Kendall Isaacs. And the Progressive Liberal Party delegation was led by Lyndon Pindon, a very pragmatic and transformative leader of the government at the time, who always believed in I think that the thing about him that distinguished him was that he was a pragmatic politician. He understood what is possible. If we had gone over there and asked for some ridiculous things that the British would have considered ridiculous, we wouldn't have succeeded. And we went over there to tell the British we will not let them impose on us in the Bahamas people as citizens who had earned no right to qualify for what we consider and still should consider the greatest prize we could give to any individual, and that's citizenship in this God-blessed, beautiful islands of the Bahamas. And we did some things. They may not be very impressive today, but they were monumental things 50 years ago, as things that we have taken for granted that predated 50 years ago. It may not have been a great thing to have a general strike today. It probably will fade into insignificance in a couple of weeks. But in 1958, it was a major thing because it brought this country to a standstill.
Yeah.
And the leadership were men, basically untrained in any profession. But for Lyndon Pindon, a lawyer, and Randall Fox, a lawyer, all the other leaders were very taxi drivers, hotel workers, other union leaders who came from the body of the workers of the Bahamas. So all these things we take for granted must realize that we owe them actually to hotel workers, to maids and waitresses and taxi drivers. And that is why it hurts me when I hear people today dismissing any of them as being irrelevant. It hurts because it is those people, those 6 women who led the fight for the women's right to vote in the Bahamas and was able to persuade an unbending individual like Stafford Sands and Sir Roland Simonette, who was rather pleasant a person, but he still followed the lead of the thought of the day of excluding women from voting. And those women were able to win for the Bahamas something that the British people only got 30-something years before. The women in Britain had to vote 30 years or so before the women in the Bahamas won it for themselves. So when we hear about the Doris Johnson and the Mary Ingram and the Georgette Simonette and Mrs. Walker and all the other wonderful ladies, those 6 women were exceptional. They were sterling ladies. And it hurts me. It hurts me because it was my joy to know 1 or 2 of them, to see them, to interact with them, and to know that they embodied the kind of courage that other women in other lands didn't have the courage to fight for when the society that they lived in would have been supportive of their getting the right to vote. We got it. 30 years after the British monarch and the British government gave it to their women, all women here want it. And when we reflect, and that is why it's so really unreasonably offensive, when people, younger people today, whom you, like rightly say, came after 73, when they look back and talk about old stories and you know, you all really didn't do anything, because everything they have that they take for granted today, somebody earned it for them. And I don't mean to suggest for a moment that we should be insensitive to their concerns, but they too must realize that our struggle was not an easy one. People died. People surrendered their lives. They put their lives on the line, and they certainly put their livelihood on the line. And they sacrificed even when they were struggling to educate their children, many of whom came along later and made contributions. And then, but some came along unmindful of the sacrifice of the generation that preceded them. I think we have a wonderful opportunity this 50th year.
Mr. Smith.
And if we don't take advantage of it, it'll be to our detriment.
Earlier you mentioned about some of the issues which were addressed. Do you feel that now we are at this juncture of 50 years, we should look retrospectively at where we are and the way we can improve ourselves?
Absolutely. That is the purpose. When you're born, you're at different stages of your life, your very discerning father would pull you aside and say, boy, you're 12. It's about time you start thinking about this. Then you become 15, and when you were 17, your dad would have said, you know, it's about time you're becoming a man. Yeah. And when you got 21, he said, now you're a man, you got to vote. You got to start thinking about buying a piece of land. You got to start thinking about down the road you want a family. What are you going to tell your children? So that's what we do. That's what the 50th year is supposed to be about. It isn't about assembling at different gatherings and just having a party, you know, with food and liquor, just having a party. Yes, have a party. But your 21st birthday got to be more than just having a party. It must be about what ought I be thinking about when the party is over. And if all we could think about is that we have had a grand time, we had a party at Clifford Park, we had one over on Windsor Park, we had one up in Fox Hill, we had a party in Exuma, we had a sailing race up there, and we had a grand time. It got to be more than that. People in the accounting profession should look at how is that profession serving this country better than it did before. How the jurors, they should look at the law and determine how ought those laws, and the court system, the judiciary system ought to look at itself and say, how can we give better service to our people so that the court system become more efficient? And in every endeavor, teachers should realize, am I really teaching these students as best as I could? Am I helping to shape their bright young minds?
Mr.
The
Smith,
politicians have got to...
We're going to take a short break here and we come right back.
Okay.